Welcome to Sykes, the Bottom Line Pharmacy Podcast, your regular dose of pharmacy CPA advice to fuel your bottom line, featuring pharmacists, key vendors, and other innovators.
Your checks, yes, you can call me, because we the best, Sykes and Company. We the best, Sykes and Company. Your accounting is a mess, there's no need for you to stress. Go online and request from the best. We the best, Sykes and Company. We the best, Sykes and Company, yes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Bottom Line Pharmacy Podcast. Today it's just me and we got Brad Howard, partner at Brown Fortunato. Is that right, Brad? I got that right?
That's right. Yep.
And always lovely to have you on. We appreciate you always jumping on our podcast. I think you've done a couple in the past.
Mm-hmm.
We work a lot with you guys, a lot with your firm, and you guys do a great job for our clients. But today we want to talk about a hot topic that I've been hearing about is the fraud, waste, and abuse audits that are popping up. So what's kind of new in that space, Brad? And, what should pharmacies be aware of to get going there?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I love the bottom line. I love talking about hot topics. And I'll tell you right now, like 15 minutes before I logged on, got an email from a long-term client, a big national pharmacy, and they just got a big fraud, waste, and abuse audit. I never name names, but, a lot of the things I'm going to touch on here in the next 20, 30 minutes, whatever, we talk. A lot of those issues I'm seeing in emails from clients every day now. It's a big deal. So, kind of go backwards, reverse maybe 10 years ago or so. A lot of the payers, PBMs, government agencies that are paying claims for Medicare and Medicaid through commercial insurance, they started auditing the heck out of pharmacies. That was kind of a new occurrence. Back in 2012, 13, 14, my pharmacy practice evolved into a big audit practice for, a few years there. And then after TRICARE quit paying for compounds and a lot of the other payers kind of, buckled down on what they were going to pay for, there was a lapse, and then fraud, waste, and abuse audits. Man, that's the big thing now. There are formal definitions for fraud, waste, and abuse audits, but I'm going to kind of put it this way. The way that the payers are using fraud, waste, and abuse audits is the way they used to use regular old standard audits. And back in the day, it was to figure out, do we have to pay all these claims or can we kind of carve it up a little bit? But now what the payers are doing through the government and through the PBMs is they're obligated to the taxpayers, or they're obligated to their plan sponsors if they're, commercial payers, PBMs. They're obligated to have a very robust fraud, waste, and abuse practice, which means they got to ferret out the pharmacies that are doing things they shouldn't be doing. And what used to be an audit is now, in a lot of cases, a fraud, waste, and abuse audit. But the difference is stark because, in the old days on an audit, a passing grade, a C, B minus, that might kind of cut it. In the fraud, waste, and abuse audit world, you got to get an A plus.
That'd be perfect.
Man, if you're not getting a 98, 99, 100, you may be getting reported to the government. They're certainly going to recoup money. They may put you on not even double secret probation anymore. They throw you on the probation list. They might suspend you. They may put you on a corrective action plan. In a lot of cases, we see these kind of creative caps, all because you got a 91 or an 89 on a fraud, waste, and abuse audit. So the stakes are really high. In some cases, I've seen pharmacies that otherwise were valuable network members that had a less than stellar grade on a fraud, waste, abuse audit. They were termed because the plan sponsors got to be able to say, the PBM's got to say to the plan sponsors, hey, we ferret out, we weed out the bad actors, the bad apples. So, you can get termed now, and if you get termed now, then you got to report it to your other payers, and you get termed again and again. So the stakes are a lot higher, which is why I'm glad I get to talk about this with you for a while.
So is this just a tactic kind of where they're just being more aggressive? And I mean, why the increase in this fraud, waste, and abuse audits?
Yeah.
versus just a regular audit like you were just talking about. I
Well,
mean,
well, let me tell you what I'm seeing a lot of is that, and this is my viewpoint, but I've been doing this with Jeff Baird down the hall and a bunch of my colleagues for the last 30 some years. And what what we're seeing, the reason we think a lot of the fraud, waste, and abuse audits are coming out, and a lot of pharmacies are having to deal with those, is because there are more and more kind of shortcut pharmacies out there that aren't really abiding by the same rules as all the pharmacies that you work with and that I work with, not going by the same rules, not really vetting their marketing practices, kind of cutting corners on their suppliers and wholesalers and the way they get their business, a little fast and loose in the way they bill their claims. And the problem is that a lot of the payers, especially the government payers, have now kind of lumped a lot of pharmacies into one big group and said, these are all bad actors. They're making a lot of money at our expense with a lot of claims that shouldn't be paid. So the real challenge for the pharmacies that I represent, that Jeff and everybody in our group represents, who mostly have pharmacy operations regionally or all around the country, but also a good number of state and mom and pops that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years. You got to distinguish yourselves from the kind of fly-by-night operations that are getting investigated. The other day, the government came out and indicted a bunch of healthcare providers. They indicted a bunch of pharmacy owners, some marketers, some telemarketers. And, their viewpoint is that the good guy pharmacies have to prove that they're not those guys. And fraud, waste, and abuse audits are a good way to do that.
mm-hmm. So, so how can pharmacies, I guess, Brad, how can pharmacies set themselves apart, and what are some kind of best practices and what's step one here for a pharmacy out there that's listening in? I want to make sure I'm protected. I don't want anything to do with any of this fraud, waste, and abuse. I want to be able to get that A+ grade. What's something check the box type things?
Yeah, I can give them a few ideas of things, just things I see coming in my email every day that might give them some pretty good tips on how to handle things. The audits that we're seeing, still quite a few of are the invoice audits, where they make you prove, if you billed 400 claims last month for this particular drug, they make you prove you had inventory sufficient to fill 400 claims for the particular drug. So, and I know you've seen these, and you've had a lot of pharmacies call you and go, "Hey, what in the world is this thing,
Yep.
Scotty?" I mean, of course I filled the prescriptions. The challenge and the tip here is a lot of times the wholesalers, the manufacturers, they get the request from the PBM, "Hey, prove to us you sold Scotty's Pharmacy enough of this drug to fill 400 claims." So the manufacturer, the wholesaler, in their spare time puts together the documentation they think, and they provide it to the payer, to the PBM. But maybe they didn't find every invoice. Maybe it wasn't the most important thing, on their desk that day. So they account for 90% of what they sold Scotty's Pharmacy. And then, Scotty's Pharmacy doesn't know that's all that got submitted on their behalf. And then Scotty's Pharmacy gets a big, recoupment letter, a discrepancy letter that says, "Hey, we can't validate, a quarter or a third of the prescriptions that you claim to have billed for this particular drug. So we're going to take it all back, or we're going to take back all of those." And then the burden is on Scotty's to appeal to prove that they actually had all that inventory. So, it's kind of a no-brainer in the sense that the good guy pharmacies all have the inventory. Whenever one of my clients gets an invoice audit, first thing I say is, "Hey man, pick up the phone, call your manufacturers, call your wholesalers, let them know, hey, I just got an invoice audit. Of course, I buy all my stuff from you, or I buy a lot of my product from your company.
Right.
Please make this priority number one to provide all these records. And while you're doing it, provide me a copy. If you don't mind, just shoot me an email with a copy of everything you're going to give to the PBM or to the payer or the plan sponsor, so that I can, run that against my own records to be sure that you provided everything." It's kind of a basic tip, but here's the problem: is that the pharmacies that don't do that end up on the wrong side of one of these invoice audits. Then you got to appeal. And when you've got to appeal, at that point, you're having to spend a bunch of time and money.
Uphill.
Yeah, to prove to
Yeah.
prove you had all the product that you needed. Another thing I see a lot of with our clients are multi-store pharmacies. Maybe they got operations in 30 or 40 states. They transfer inventory among one another when there are shortages, but they don't contemporaneously document all that. It's not timestamped for, July 7. You got Scotty and you got Allen, they're related pharmacies. And so Allen's pharmacy transferred some inventory to Scotty's, but we didn't write it up. I mean, we're family, we're all one big business. We're not going to worry about that. Well, then the audit comes in and you got to account for why Scotty only has manufacturer invoices for this much product, but he dispensed that much. So then Scotty says, well, I got it from Allen. I can prove it to you with an affidavit, dated the day of the audit. Not quite as compelling as the contemporaneous documentation. So we have all of our clients document those transfers in real time with the amount of product transferred, the exact kind of product, time stamped. If it's a control, of course we do that because DEA requires it. But even with the commercial claims, the non-controlleds, we do that. And then when it comes time to prove why Scotty had all this inventory between the manufacturer's invoices, the wholesaler invoices, and the intra-company transfers, we can prove 100% you had the inventory to fill all the scripts, and we get a A+ on the invoice audit, and then we go off their invoice audit list for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
It's interesting because I guess this is just me being dumb, I guess, but they're looking at the invoice side, the supply side. They're not even looking at the prescription and these valid prescriptions. They're just going straight towards, did you have the inventory for these prescriptions?
That's getting to be a lot more common. I'm seeing a bunch of those. And then what I'm seeing a lot of is to the point you made, like, well, you filled the prescription because you had a prescription to fill. I'm seeing a lot more audits that make the pharmacies valid. These are fraud, waste, and abuse audits. Make the pharmacies validate there was actually a valid prescription and there's medical necessity for the prescription. So, I've been around for a long time. For many, many years of my practice, we weren't required to prove. That's what doctors prove. Pharmacies fill prescriptions. I'm seeing a lot more of these fraud, waste, and abuse audits that will question because, maybe they did an inventory, they made a few phone calls, payer did. Their special investigations unit, SIU, made a few phone calls, and maybe Scotty Sr. is a patient, but he can't remember getting that prescription 9 months ago. He's like, I don't know if I got that prescription or no, I'm not so sure I did. I don't think I ever had that drug. So, a couple of things like that, or a competitor turns you in, or your number comes up, and then the PBM is doing an audit to say, hey, validate these 100 prescriptions here. So show us the prescriptions, show us what you filled them with, show us that there was scientific data to support what you were filling, and also that the patients needed that. So that kind of an audit, which in a lot of cases is a fraud, waste, and abuse audit, man, that's a part-time job for the pharmacy.
Yeah, well, how are you supposed to document the data in terms of the medical reasoning behind that? I mean, that's the doctor, right? I mean,
that is the doctor's job. But to the payer and
picking up the phone and calling all these doctors, and
there are so a tip I'm going to give all the pharmacies that are watching this. I mean, I know they would want to do this anyway because it's good business, but keep close tabs on your prescribers, especially those that write a lot of scripts for the pharmacy. Keep close tabs on those. Keep good contact with them, because when one of these audits comes in, what I tell the pharmacy, hey man, pick up the phone, call the doctor, and tell him you're going to need some help to validate some of these. You've got prescriptions in your file, but you don't keep medical records. You're a pharmacy, right? Scotty's Pharmacy doesn't keep medical records for Brad Howard. But if Scotty's Pharmacy doesn't want to lose that contract, they're going to find a way to get some validation for those prescriptions for Brad Howard and the other 99 patients on the audit. So if you pick up the phone and you talk to the doctors, they have to deal with some BS. I got an audit here to prove that you sent me valid prescriptions. I need your help. Here's what I need, and I'm going to make it easy for you as I can. So one of the tips I give pharmacies is, get you an attestation or an affidavit. It's called something different about every place, but get you an attestation that the doctors not the doctor's nurse, but the doctors can sign and date to validate these prescriptions. But here's something I see that's a tip. You know, a lot of the pharmacies will pull out an attestation that they might have used 10 years ago. It's got a couple typos in it. Maybe they had to put some white tape over it and change a few words. And like, it just looks like crap. It looks like junk. And then they do that times, 45 for the medical records they got to provide, or times 100, whatever the number is. And they send all those into the payer and then wonder why the payer's not thinking they validated all the prescriptions. So, what I always advise is, hey, we put together a draft attestation for you. You make sure that's 100% going to work for Scotty's Pharmacy. You make sure it's going to work for Dr. White, down the street, who sends you a lot of business. And then when we're on the same page about that, you send that to Dr. White and say, does this attestation accurately reflect the prescription here? Dr. White says, yeah, that's it. I'm going to send you 99 of those because they're all your patients. But then you keep the email chain, and you might end up providing that to the payer as a part of your audit response, which demonstrates, look, I talked to Dr. White. We didn't keep medical records in our file, but Dr. White validated all these prescriptions. Then we got no fraud, waste, and abuse issue whatsoever. But the pharmacies that call me, not a lot of them do this, but the ones that call me on Friday afternoon at 3, they're like, hey man, hey Brad, this audit response is due Monday and they're auditing 25 scripts. Do you have a attestation I can use? Okay, sure. We're gonna make that work over the weekend, but like, that's not A+ work.
Yeah. So you want a professional, good looking attestation to make it look like you're on top of these things, right?
Well, you do. And if maybe your argument, because I know you talked to a lot of pharmacies about this, if maybe your argument is, hey, under state law, PBM, you can't really ask for all this. We're in Tennessee, we're in Oklahoma, we're in Texas, we're in Arizona, whatever state, and we all have our own pharmacy laws. A lot of those were passed, Scotty, in 2019, 20, 21, 22. So let's say, hey, under Arizona law, they can't ask for medical records from pharmacies. Well, then what you got to do in the audit response is lead with that. Lead with, hey, under Arizona law, ... cut and paste the law there. I mean, make a really robust response that demonstrates why, if you're not going to provide the attestations, even if you are, I think you at least lead with, hey, the law says you really aren't supposed to do this. And that's where a lawyer can help you kind of wordsmith it so it's, direct but not offensive. I mean, none of us like doing the work. So it's pretty easy to be a little bit more direct and offensive than maybe we want to be. So, we lead with the law. And then if we're going to lead with the attestations, great. If we're not going to do 100 attestations, because the law doesn't require that, but we still want to prove we had 100 valid scripts, then we do, I might advise the pharmacist, hey, work with me on an affidavit that we'll send over to Dr. White, one affidavit that lists all the patients, dates of service, dates of the prescriptions, or whatever. And then he can have somebody in his staff validate every one of those in their records. He's going to sign off on the overarching affidavit for 100 scripts. It's not exactly what they asked for, but if Arizona law says they don't get what they asked for, we give them Arizona law.
Yep.
We give them something that should satisfy them anyway. It's fraud, waste, and abuse. So we're going to go the extra mile or so to give them what they need to say, you know what, we're going to check the box on Scotty's Pharmacy. He's one of the good guys.
Yeah, I know, when we're working with the IRS, we make it as absolutely as easy as possible. I mean, it is like, it's a kindergartner can do it. Like A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. And a lot of times they do the audit or whatever it is, and it's no change, and you're done in a few days, a few weeks versus several months.
Because they check the box that you had all the stuff they needed. And you know what? I mean, I know a lot of pharmacies are listening. Some have had bad experiences with PBMs and payers, the government, Medicaid. Maybe they don't share this viewpoint. I understand that. I deal with aggrieved pharmacies and audits all day long. So I certainly understand the sentiment. But the reality is, the easier you can make their job to check the box that you're one of the good guys, the more work you can put in to do that. Like with the IRS, the more likely they're going to give it a few weeks. And they're going to come back and go, because I see these all day long, because we work in a lot of audits, a lot of appeals, no discrepancies. See, your recoupment amount is, it's always the same letter, right? Your recoupment amount is $, and it has either a blank with nothing on it or a blank with a 0. that's, you want to frame that thing. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
But because you did the work, because the pharmacy did the work to demonstrate. And, so the pharmacies that just fax in 100 pages with some little, attached to a record, you gotta do more. I mean, I've ghostwritten
Yeah.
10,000 letters that are nice and official and say all the right things. You check all the boxes. You make it easy for them to read and go, these are one of the good guys. There's no fraud, waste, and abuse here. You make it easy to look at your records. You make it easy to talk to Scotty.
Yep.
If you have any questions about what Scotty provided.
And then you're on your way, hopefully.
Yeah. And if you're not, you got appeals. And if you're going to appeal a fraud, waste, and abuse audit result, if you want to win, you better do all these things I'm talking about in the initial response, because in a lot of cases, the payer, the PBM, the plan sponsor is looking at the appeal level just to kind of rubber stamp what the auditor did. So you got to give the appeal level, where there's usually a higher level of review, usually a little bit better people on the team at the payer looking at those records. Make it easy for them to go, you know what? Auditor might have gotten kind of aggressive because Scotty did a bang up job providing all the things that demonstrate no fraud, waste, and abuse.
Yeah. What about some copayment waivers? I know that's kind of a topic that pops up from time to time, and where the fine line is there and best practices with that. Any tips on that one, Brad?
Yeah, I'd like to give you some tips. So I'm going to tell you a story just for a second, because this will kind of bring it to home for the pharmacies. I got hired last month to look. There was a pharmacy under investigation. They got indicted. The owners all got indicted. Well, they're going to be indicted. It's not anybody I represented before, but it all started with a fraud, waste, and abuse audit for these drugs they were providing during COVID, and then they did a pretty sorry job of responding to the audit. One of the things that was audited were copay waivers, and so they asked in the fraud, waste, and abuse audit, do you always collect copayments? If not, why? That's not the best place to demonstrate why, but they had a chance and said financial need. And then, they asked them, like, what about financial need or whatever? Patient didn't have the money to pay the copayments, and so, and they're going to get indicted for that because they had a lot of other issues with the way they got their business. So I had to give the criminal defense lawyer an opinion he didn't love, which is, hey, if these guys had come to see me at the outset, we wouldn't have done it like this. We would have fixed it all. It wouldn't look like this. So I think you got your work cut out for you if you want to take this pharmacist's case to trial, because I don't think they have a very good shot. Mm-hmm. Well, the fraud, waste, and abuse part that relates to copayments, it's not easy, but it's important. So, the first thing is to figure out, who is your payer, because there are different laws, federal, state, and all the commercial plans have different laws about what you can do with copayments and with waivers. There's some PBMs that say you can't waive copayments at all. Period. End of story. But most say there's got to be demonstrable financial need. So the tips that we give all pharmacies when they come work with us is, let's take a quick look at your copayment waiver paperwork that you would present to a patient. What does it look like? Are you advertising this, or are you marketing this because you shouldn't? And if you are, let's be very careful. You can mention that it's a possibility, but don't be selling that as a service to get patients to come to Scotty's pharmacy. But then the more important thing is, somebody tells Scotty, I can't afford the copayment. It's a specialty drug. It's $250 out of my pocket. I don't have that kind of money. But the pharmacy is required to collect to the plan sponsor, insists upon that. Patient hasn't got $250. What does the paperwork look like that says the patient hasn't got $250? We prepare all different kinds of copayment waiver, financial need paperwork, but the things they all have in common are that the patient provides financial information to Scotty, and it's not going to be Scotty. Scotty's too busy, running all the pharmacies, but Scotty's got a person, an accounts payable person or accounts receivable person who's going to be there, talking to patients about, what can you pay? You got to collect some information on their financial status. What does it look like? Usually you want to collect some documents, even if it ends up just being, at a minimum, some kind of a statement from the patient. You want to be able to figure out, can they pay some based on these numbers, some but maybe not all? What is that sum? So the advice I always give on the copay waivers is collect them all. If you can't collect them all with the passage of a little bit of time and work something up. So if you're audited, to the extent you gave them a little bit of time, there's a set time there, and you're not going to fill the scripts if they don't oblige by their payments. If you're going to reduce it somewhat, what is the financial paperwork that supports the reduction? Did you collect the part they can pay? It sounds like kind of basic, but when you got, 900 patients you're filling for every week, and 30 or 40 of them have some financial issues, and you're going to consider waivers for some of them, maybe not all of them. It's a time suck, but it's important.
So what if a pharmacy uses house charge accounts, which we don't recommend? Let the credit card companies carry that that balance, not you at the pharmacy. But what if a lot of pharmacies still have those kind of baked in? Before maybe you allow patients to use that, maybe you get a financial form from them that verifies their solvency or whatnot. And then what about those that they go through that and then it's 180 days later they still haven't gotten the copay and you're going to write it off? I mean, is it kind of the same thing?
Yeah, it's a good question, because not everybody comes through on what they say they can do. I mean, maybe it's more wishful thinking, like, really need the drug, and I think I can pay this over this much time or whatever, and then they don't do it. So the first thing in audits I've seen where we can't prove, they might audit 100 patients, right? And of those 100 patients, maybe we have 8 that we didn't collect copayments for. I'm not advising to do that. That's not a good number in the PBM world, but let's say we have 8 that we didn't collect full copayments on, and some of those are, half of those are people who said, I'll pay you out over time. Well, if they missed the first payment in, August 2024, you got to cut them off. You can't fill the script anymore. And at least you can demonstrate to the PBM if you're audited, hey, look, we had this arrangement, we had this financial information, financial need, hardship. And based on that, we came up with this payment plan on the copayment, but they missed the first or second payment. We sent a notification, we called them, we documented that in our file. We didn't fill any more scripts. So do we collect 100% of the copays for that patient? We didn't, but do we have a good track record of proving that we made an effort to collect it? And then when we couldn't collect it, we didn't fill it any longer. Yeah, we have that, and I've successfully navigated a number of audits with evidence like that. But it requires that be the pharmacy policy, and that the people that enforce the policy, people that collect the money, they understand the policy and they're consistent. Because when the PBMs do audit the copayments, they're not going to audit 10 patients; they're going to audit 150.
Yep. Now, what about marketing efforts? Because I know a lot of pharmacies, from time to time, whether they're already doing some marketing activities or they're looking to expand their marketing into different areas. Where does that come into play? Because I know there's a lot of anti-kickback and Stark law and things like that. That's beyond my expertise. But
I think you probably know more healthcare law than any accountant in the country, just based on what you deal with all the time. But yeah, with marketing, you're seeing, and we're seeing it. I saw it in that investigation I talked about a few minutes ago, where I'm kind of grading the papers of the pharmacy, but after the fact, I had to give them a D minus. But marketing was a part of their problem. So and they're kind of an extreme example. They were getting indicted. I mean, a lot of the people that are going to watch this, nobody's ever going to probably ever get indicted. Maybe they don't know anybody who's ever going to get indicted, but you might lose big contracts. You might get cut off by big payers. But you could get in trouble with the government. You could have a false claims act filed by somebody that Scotty's pharmacy fired, 6 months ago, and he wasn't too thrilled about it. And so he turned in Scotty's pharmacy to the government going, hey, look, the way they get their business, I think it's kind of sketchy. I remember reading some law about the kickbacks, and, they're paying a bunch of independent contractors who steer them business, get them a bunch of doctors' prescriptions, and then they pay these independent contractors, buy the prescription. Well, that's, you would think that's kind of gone by the wayside, but it is not. I mean, it was in the file I reviewed last month. I still get pharmacies that will hire me to do a compliance check on them. Hey, how good are we on things? We don't want to get in trouble and figure out we had some problems. So I'll kind of go through all the usual, suspects with them and make sure that they're good on things. And they say, we have some part-time sales reps. My first question is, are they bona fide W-2 employees? Well, no, they're contract. Okay, well, we got a problem there because the kickback statute has a really nice safe harbor for bona fide employees. It's not a no-brainer to satisfy. You got to do a lot of things to prove they're really bona fide employees. A part-timer that you're calling a contractor, that ain't going to qualify. So there's a pretty good chance if somebody turns you in for that, turns in Scotty's pharmacy for that to the government or to a payer, they're going to figure out, hey, what are all the prescriptions that independent contractor, part-time mom, part-time dad brought to the pharmacy? They're going to pull all that stuff back. And if it's got a lawyer attached to it, because maybe, the guy that you fired 6 months ago got mad and got a lawyer and they filed a False Claims Act lawsuit. Now you got to deal with some multiples and you're dealing with some penalties and some lawyer's fees. So what wasn't a lot of money to Scotty to get this business to the contractor is multiplied 3-4 times over. And it's a real problem. And that's, the more obvious thing that I'm seeing now is that the pharmacies call these sales representatives to go see all the doctors and talk about, hey, here's our prescription pad. We have all these really kind of cutting edge products that you ought to prescribe to your patients. So they go talk to all these doctors and they really are able to convince them it's a great product. You really should be, get your patients on these prescriptions. But then these employees don't check into the home office. They're not bound by a handbook. They're bonused, in ways that I would not condone as a healthcare lawyer. If you asked me up front, hey, should we do this? I'd say, no, it's a bad idea. One thing I do with a lot of pharmacies is we put together sales representative employment agreements where we lay out exactly how they do get paid, but also the things they're not getting paid for. We make it crystal clear so that if there's ever an issue about, hey, did this business come to Scotty's Pharmacy through a bona fide employee, we can demonstrate these are bona fide employees. They have to go to the home office. They have a boss. They're held accountable. They get reviews at the end of the year. All the things that make them a real employee so that they can be marketing on behalf of the pharmacy.
And they're paid via payroll. They're not paid as independent contractor 1099.
You know this stuff all too well in your role.
Yeah, I mean, if I see a 1099 on a P&L for a pharmacy, that's one of the first questions we're asking.
I'm like, that guy better be cutting grass.
Like, what are you doing with this person? Yeah.
Yeah, they better be cleaning out the gutters if they're doing anything inside the pharmacy.
There you go.
If they're not cleaning it, and I'm not sure why they're on the, why you're paying them anything.
Yeah, that seems like it's out there more often than not because of I think a lot of pharmacy owners don't really understand or grasp the difference between maybe a 1099 independent contractor and a W-2 employee. Those kind of get interchanged somewhat, and you got to be careful with that.
Well, you do. And, you see a lot of these employment agreements. I see them all the time. I kind of collect this stuff for fun. I know I'm kind of a law nerd, but I collect all these things that over the years, I'm like, man, I'm glad I didn't put my name on that thing because that thing's a piece of trash. But I'll see these agreements. I'll see these employment agreements and, these handbooks. I'll see these things that try to define why somebody is a bona fide W-2 employee. And sometimes they make it worse than not having anything in writing at all. But the more important takeaway is this. If a pharmacy is out marketing itself to physicians, which 99% of all the pharmacies I work for market to physicians. I mean, that's where they get the business. They got to demonstrate value, why they stand apart from all their competition, right? So if they're marketing to these physicians, besides the obvious, don't spend more than you should in non-monetary comp to entertain them and taking the ball games to get their business. I mean, obviously those are the kind of basics, but then above and beyond that, the people that you send to market need to be bona fide employees. You got to be sure they're not doing things underhanded or, behind the scenes to make those doctors happier. Some examples might be that I've seen, I'm not going to give any names, but, they might do the steak dinner, the drinks, the football tickets, things like that. And you got to keep that under a number. And I'm seeing those indictments that were served last week. There were some references to ball game tickets, expensive dinners, things like that. I mean, the government looks at that sort of stuff. But what I'm saying is keep really good records. And as an accountant, you can appreciate this, but keep really good records of what you do spend on the physician practices. Be sure you're not going over the limit. Be sure you keep track of what you provide to patients so that nothing looks like a improper inducement. I mean, keep track of the numbers, get a compliance program in place up front so that your marketing is clearly prescribed what your marketing people can do and what they can't do. Then you got to audit them to be sure they're doing it. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that I kind of take for granted after having done this for so many years. But there's so many pharmacies that they're great pharmacies. They just haven't focused on that of late. And then when they get the audit, the fraud, waste, and abuse audit, and they've got to prove that they're one of the good guys,
Yep.
it's a lot more challenging.
Well, as Jeff Baird says, if it talks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. I don't know how he says it, but he nails it every time, and that's what
I can hear him saying it right down the hall.
Oh man. Well, Brad, anything else you want to add about this FWA audits?
I think the main thing I'd like to add here is that, so fraud, waste, and abuse, like there are legal definitions for what it is, but here's the way the PBMs and the payers and the government, because I deal with a lot of government investigations around the country, and I can see what pharmacies get in trouble for. And so the old quote back in the 60s from the Supreme Court case was Justice Stewart, who was asked to define hardcore pornography. He's like, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. That's kind of the way the payers and the PBMs think they see fraud, waste, and abuse. They know it when they see it. The advice I like to give pharmacies, and I represent a bunch of good guy pharmacies. Our firm represents a bunch of good guy pharmacies, compliant pharmacies with compliance officers and lawyers and all kinds of things. But even all of the really, really good guys, when you're put to the test on a fraud, waste, and abuse audit, invest the time, invest the resources, make it look perfect, then have somebody else look it over and proofread it and redline it and make it look even more perfect, and then pass with the 98 or 99 and avoid the appeal and everything else that comes with it.
Amen to that. Couldn't have said that any better. I can relate to that 100%. When you got good books, you got good records, you got mileage log, you got depreciation schedule tied down, you've got all that, and you've put in a nice package with a bow on top to the IRS, they move right on. They'll stamp it and you're out of there. So
we're the same way with healthcare companies, pharmacies, the PBMs and the government auditors and the agents. Put it all with a nice bow, wrap it up, open it up every so often and look at it, make sure it's up to date, and you're caught up in 2024 with the way things ought to be. And then pay attention when the audits come in and put all your effort into them.
There you go. Well, Brad, thanks again for hopping on. Always a pleasure to have you on. And you and Jeff and your team is just fantastic to work with. We appreciate all you do for our clients and just for in general in the industry. So we'll have to do this again sometime soon.
We appreciate you guys. It's great to see you. It's good to be on the bottom line. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes.